The fastest way to lose power is to believe it belongs only to you. On a bright Tuesday morning in downtown Brookhaven, the courthouse district moved with its usual rhythm as attorneys hurried across crosswalks, clerks balanced steaming coffee cups beside thick case files, and patrol cars rolled slowly through streets lined with government buildings. Danielle Brooks stepped out of a county courthouse after finishing an early hearing that had lasted less than 30 minutes. At 41, she carried herself with quiet confidence that never demanded attention. Her cream blazer rested neatly over a crisp white blouse. Her black slacks matched polished shoes, and her shoulder-length black hair moved gently in the warm breeze as she checked the time on her silver watch. She looked like another professional beginning a busy workday, and that was exactly how she preferred it. She crossed the sidewalk toward the public parking area where she had legally left her sedan earlier that morning, only to stop when she noticed flashing amber lights reflecting against nearby windows. A tow truck sat behind her vehicle while a uniformed police officer stood beside it holding a citation clipboard. Danielle slowed her pace but kept her expression calm. "Good morning, officer," she said politely. "Is there a problem with my vehicle?" Officer Nathan Caldwell barely glanced at her before continuing to write. Tall, athletic, and wearing the confidence of someone convinced he had already reached the correct conclusion, he answered without looking up. "This vehicle is being towed." Danielle blinked once. "May I ask why?" Nathan pointed toward a temporary parking restriction sign several yards away. "Violation of posted restrictions." Danielle looked carefully at the sign, then back toward the painted curb where her car was parked. She quietly noticed that the restriction applied to a different section of the block scheduled for afternoon utility work, not the space where her sedan Saturday. "Officer," she said evenly, "I believe there may be a misunderstanding. That sign begins beyond this parking meter." Nathan finally looked directly at her. His expression remained firm, but his tone carried an edge of dismissal. "Ma'am, I have already made my determination. People come down here every morning claiming the rules do not apply to them," Nathan said, looking at Danielle's briefcase before adding, "And dressing like you belong in the courthouse does not make you an attorney." Danielle did not raise her voice. She simply asked, "Would you mind checking the meter numbers before the truck leaves?" The tow truck operator glanced between them without saying anything. Nathan folded his citation book closed. "You can discuss it with the city after your vehicle is impounded." Nathan glanced at her courthouse clothes and gave a dismissive half-smile. "Everyone downtown thinks they know the law. Pay the fee, file the form, and move on." Several pedestrians slowed as they walked past. One quietly lifted a phone, recording what appeared to be a routine interaction. Danielle noticed, but ignored it. Experience had taught her that emotional reactions rarely change professional decisions. "I understand your position," she replied. "I am simply requesting that we verify the parking designation before additional costs are created." Nathan gave a short shake of his head. "The paperwork is finished." The hydraulic lift began raising the front wheels of her sedan. Danielle watched silently, then reached into her briefcase and removed a small notebook. Instead of arguing, she calmly wrote down the tow truck number, the patrol car number, the exact time, and the names displayed on both uniforms. Nathan frowned as he noticed her documenting everything. "Planning to file a complaint?" he asked. Danielle met his eyes without anger. "I always keep accurate records." The answer seemed to irritate him more than any argument could have. The tow truck slowly pulled away with her vehicle while traffic continued flowing through the intersection as though nothing unusual had happened. Danielle slipped the notebook back into her briefcase, thanked the tow truck operator for waiting until she had finished recording the information, and quietly walked toward the courthouse entrance instead of chasing after the truck. Nathan watched her leave, convinced the matter was over before his shift reached noon. Inside the courthouse lobby, a security officer recognized Danielle immediately and paused in surprise when she calmly asked for a phone instead of her office escort. Moments later, a call was placed to the city legal department, and before Officer Nathan Caldwell had even returned to his patrol car, someone reviewing the vehicle registration softly repeated the owner's name twice before saying, "Hold on. This cannot be right." The assistant enlarged the county personnel record on the screen. Beneath Danielle Brooks's photograph were 4 words Nathan Caldwell had never imagined: District Attorney of Brookhaven County. Danielle Brooks thanked the courthouse security officer, borrowed the desk phone, and placed a brief call to the city legal department before calmly returning it with a polite smile. She did not raise her voice, demand special treatment, or mention her title. Instead, she asked that the towing records, parking enforcement logs, and any available surveillance footage for that block be preserved according to standard municipal procedure. The request was short, precise, and completely routine. Within minutes, a legal assistant opened the vehicle registration associated with the impound report and paused after recognizing the owner's name. Rather than making assumptions, the assistant quietly forwarded the file to Assistant District Attorney Kevin Ramirez for verification. Kevin studied the registration, confirmed the information through official county records, and immediately understood why accuracy mattered more than speed. Meanwhile, Officer Nathan Caldwell completed his paperwork and resumed patrol, believing he had simply handled another parking violation. He remembered the woman only as someone who had remained unusually composed while her vehicle was towed. Her refusal to argue felt almost dismissive to him, reinforcing his confidence that he had handled the situation correctly. Across town, the tow truck arrived at the municipal impound facility, where Supervisor Marcus Ellis reviewed the intake documents before signing the chain of custody. Marcus noticed that the citation referenced temporary restrictions and casually compared the listed parking space with the attached location photographs, a habit developed over many years to avoid administrative mistakes. His eyes narrowed slightly. The marker shown in the photographs appeared farther down the block than the vehicle's recorded position. He looked again, then quietly set the paperwork aside instead of finalizing the file. At Danielle's request, the County Ethics Council confirmed that her office would take no role in the personal dispute. Danielle then retained independent civil counsel, who immediately issued formal preservation notices for the responding officer's body camera footage, dispatch communications, parking enforcement authorization, the city's temporary restriction permit, and any available surveillance recordings. No accusations were made. No conclusions were announced. The notices simply ensured that every relevant record would remain available while the facts were reviewed through the ordinary legal process. With each preserved document, the picture became a little clearer. Halfway through the afternoon, Sergeant Rebecca Owens received a notification from Departmental Administration asking her to verify the incident report before it entered permanent records. She considered the request unusual because routine towing reports rarely attracted immediate legal review. After reading Nathan's narrative, she asked dispatch to confirm the exact location of the temporary parking restriction signs. Dispatch replied that City Public Works had documented every placement with time-stamped photographs before construction crews arrived. Rebecca quietly requested those photographs as well. At that exact moment, Nathan's portable radio crackled with a message directing him to contact his supervisor when available regarding a report completed earlier that morning. The request sounded calm and procedural, but it lingered in his thoughts longer than he expected. He replayed the encounter in his mind and could not remember the woman ever becoming upset. Instead, he remembered her carefully writing notes while thanking the tow truck operator. That detail suddenly felt unusual. Late that afternoon, Danielle walked into her office carrying only a folder and a notebook. She greeted her staff as she always did and immediately returned to reviewing criminal case files already scheduled for court the following morning. She never mentioned the towing incident unless someone asked why she had arrived by rideshare. Her restraint surprised Kevin, who quietly informed her that several agencies had already begun collecting records connected to the event. Danielle simply nodded. "Facts have their own timetable," she said softly. "We do not need anything beyond the truth." As the courthouse prepared to close for the evening, Marcus Ellis finally received the city's original parking restriction map, placed it beside the intake photographs, and realized one critical detail did not match. He reached for the phone, knowing the next conversation could change far more than the location of a single parked car. Marcus Ellis held the parking restriction map beside the intake photographs for nearly a full minute before reaching a conclusion he wished had been wrong. The temporary restriction signs had been installed farther down the block than the report indicated, leaving Danielle Brooks's parking space outside the restricted area when her vehicle had been towed. Marcus immediately called the city parking enforcement office and requested confirmation from the original installation records. The employee who answered reviewed the digital archive, compared the time-stamped photographs with the permit issued by Public Works, and quietly confirmed the same result. The restriction boundaries did not include Danielle's parking space at the time of the tow. Marcus thanked the employee, documented the conversation in the impound file, and notified his supervisor that the vehicle should not be released until the legal review determined the proper administrative process. Across town, Sergeant Rebecca Owens received the same supporting photographs from Public Works. She enlarged each image on her computer screen, comparing street markings, parking meter numbers, and utility flags painted on the pavement. Every detail pointed toward the same uncomfortable possibility. Before drawing conclusions, she requested Officer Nathan Caldwell's body camera footage. The recording showed Danielle calmly asking that the parking meter numbers be verified before the tow proceeded. She never argued. She never resisted. She simply requested another look at the evidence. Rebecca replayed that portion twice before quietly removing her reading glasses and leaning back in her chair. If the parking location had been verified before the tow, the entire incident might have ended differently. At nearly the same time, Nathan completed another routine call and returned to the station to finish paperwork. Rebecca asked him to step into her office. Her voice remained calm, giving away nothing about what she had already reviewed. She asked him to describe the towing incident from memory before looking at any reports. Nathan confidently repeated that the vehicle had been parked inside the temporary restriction zone and that the driver had questioned his decision after the tow process had already begun. Rebecca listened without interruption, then asked one simple question. Did you personally verify the meter number against the city restriction order? Nathan hesitated for the first time that day. He explained that he relied on the nearby temporary signs because they appeared to cover that section of the block. Rebecca thanked him for his honesty and ended the meeting without criticism, but as Nathan walked out of her office, he realized she had never said whether his answer matched the evidence. The uncertainty stayed with him for the rest of the afternoon. Meanwhile, Assistant District Attorney Kevin Ramirez completed his review of the dispatch records, body camera request, parking permit, and registration documents before carrying a neatly organized file into Danielle's office. She read every page carefully without changing expression. After several quiet minutes, she closed the folder and asked only one question. Has every agency been given the opportunity to preserve its records? Kevin nodded. Everything has been requested through normal legal channels. Danielle thanked him and placed the file inside her desk rather than announcing any decision. She understood that facts carried greater weight when every party had been allowed to speak. As evening settled over the courthouse district, a clerk from the city attorney's office called Sergeant Rebecca Owens with a routine request that immediately changed the atmosphere. The office wanted complete copies of every document connected to the tow before the next business day because a formal legal claim was expected. Rebecca slowly looked toward Nathan's desk across the room, while miles away Danielle quietly signed a single authorization form that marked only the beginning of a process capable of reaching far beyond one improperly towed car. The following morning arrived with an unusual sense of quiet that often surrounded important legal decisions before anyone outside the process realized they had begun. Danielle Brooks reached her office shortly before 8 o'clock, carrying the same leather briefcase she used every day. Nothing about her routine suggested that anything extraordinary had happened. She greeted the receptionist, reviewed the court calendar, answered several routine emails, and met briefly with Assistant District Attorney Kevin Ramirez to discuss unrelated criminal cases scheduled for trial. Only after those responsibilities were complete did she open the folder containing the records from the towing incident. Every document had been arranged in chronological order. The parking restriction permit, the impound report, the dispatch log, the body camera preservation request, the Public Works photographs. Danielle read each page with careful attention, making handwritten notes in the margins instead of relying on memory. She understood that every successful legal action began with discipline long before it reached a courtroom. Across town, Sergeant Rebecca Owens continued reviewing the department's internal records. She requested previous towing reports completed by Officer Nathan Caldwell during the past 18 months, not because she believed a pattern existed, but because departmental policy required supervisors to examine comparable incidents whenever questions about procedure arose. As the files arrived one by one, she compared locations, citations, and supporting documentation. Most appeared complete. A few required minor corrections that had already been addressed. Then she paused over one report that contained another disputed parking restriction. The details differed, yet one similarity stood out. Verification of the exact parking designation had not been documented before enforcement action was taken. Rebecca quietly marked the report for further review. Rebecca then reviewed footage from another parking dispute recorded 2 weeks earlier. In that encounter, Nathan had allowed a white businessman nearly 10 minutes to retrieve a permit from his office before deciding whether to authorize a tow. Danielle had asked for less than 1 minute to verify a meter number, yet he had refused. 2 prior complaints had already warned that Nathan sometimes made enforcement decisions before completing required verification. Both had resulted in written counseling, making the towing incident his 3rd documented failure to follow the same safeguard. At nearly the same time, Marcus Ellis completed his own administrative memorandum for the impound facility, attaching the photographs that showed where Danielle's vehicle had actually been parked. His report remained factual, avoiding conclusions and personal opinions. Experience had taught him that accurate records spoke more clearly than emotional language ever could. Mid-morning brought another unexpected development when the city attorney's office formally requested certified copies of every record connected to the incident, including maintenance logs showing when temporary parking signs had been installed and inspected. Employees throughout several departments began gathering documents that normally remained buried in archives. No one raised alarms. No one accused anyone of misconduct. Yet the growing number of official requests quietly signaled that the matter had expanded beyond an ordinary towing dispute. Officer Nathan Caldwell noticed the difference as well. Dispatch informed him that his body camera recording had been placed under evidence retention instructions, meaning it could not be deleted under the department's routine storage schedule. He had experienced evidence preservation in criminal investigations before, but never for one of his own parking enforcement actions. For the first time since the encounter, genuine uncertainty replaced confidence. He replayed Danielle's calm request in his memory. "Would you mind checking the meter numbers before the truck leaves?" The sentence sounded different now than it had the day before. Instead of hearing disagreement, he began hearing a request for verification that he had declined. That realization lingered as he finished his shift. Later that afternoon, Kevin Ramirez entered Danielle's office carrying one final document that had just arrived from Public Works. It contained certified measurements showing the exact distance between the temporary restriction signs and Danielle's parking space. Danielle studied the diagram without speaking, then carefully placed it on top of the growing stack of evidence. She closed the folder, looked toward the courthouse window where the afternoon sunlight reflected across the city streets, and quietly authorized the preparation of a formal civil complaint. Less than an hour later, the city attorney's office received official notice that legal action was being prepared, and before anyone had the opportunity to shape the public narrative, one simple instruction reached every department involved: preserve every record, because the next stage would unfold under the authority of the court. By the end of the week, the city attorney's office had assembled a conference room filled with neatly organized binders, digital evidence logs, certified maps, and departmental records, each one representing a small piece of a much larger picture. No one in the room questioned whether Danielle Brooks had the legal standing to pursue the matter. The only question left was how broadly the evidence would reach once every document had been examined under oath. Danielle entered the meeting carrying only a slim folder, while Assistant District Attorney Kevin Ramirez had already arranged the supporting materials in chronological order. There was no dramatic speech and no display of anger. Danielle simply reviewed the timeline once more, confirming that every statement matched the available evidence. She reminded everyone present that accuracy mattered more than speed because a successful civil action depended on facts that could withstand careful scrutiny. Across town, Sergeant Rebecca Owens met with the department's professional standards commander to discuss the administrative review that had quietly expanded beyond a single towing report. The commander emphasized that the purpose of the inquiry was not to reach conclusions before all evidence had been collected, but to determine whether departmental policy had been followed from beginning to end. Rebecca presented the parking restriction photographs, the body camera footage, the dispatch records, and the certified measurements from Public Works. Each document pointed toward the same concern. Verification opportunities had existed before the tow, yet they had not been fully used. The commander nodded thoughtfully and instructed investigators to continue gathering records without interruption. Meanwhile, Officer Nathan Caldwell noticed that several supervisors had requested copies of reports he completed over the previous year. Although no one accused him of misconduct, the unusual level of administrative attention unsettled him. He began reviewing departmental policy manuals after his shift, searching for guidance on parking enforcement procedures that he had once considered routine. As he reread the section describing officer discretion and the importance of confirming temporary restrictions before authorizing a tow, he realized the language was far more specific than he had remembered. The discovery lingered in his thoughts long after he closed the manual, creating the first genuine doubt that his decision might not survive formal review. Later that afternoon, Danielle met privately with outside counsel representing her in the civil matter. Together, they examined every possible legal theory before narrowing the complaint to the strongest and most clearly supported claims. Danielle insisted that the filing remain focused on documented actions rather than emotional arguments. She refused to exaggerate facts or speculate about motives that could not be proven. Her attorney quietly remarked that such restraint often strengthened a case because judges trusted evidence more than dramatic language. Danielle simply smiled and replied, "The record will speak for itself." Those words stayed with everyone in the room. Before the meeting concluded, the completed complaint was printed, reviewed one final time, and signed. Every page reflected weeks of careful preparation rather than impulse. The filing requested accountability through the ordinary legal process, reimbursement for documented losses, and judicial review of the actions that had led to the unnecessary tow. No personal attacks appeared anywhere in the document. As evening settled across the city, a court clerk officially accepted the complaint for filing, assigned a case number, and scheduled the next procedural steps according to standard civil practice. Within hours, formal notice began moving through the legal system toward the city and the police department. At nearly the same moment, Officer Nathan Caldwell received an email directing him to appear for an administrative interview the following week and to bring all notes related to the incident. He stared at the message for several quiet seconds before closing his laptop, unaware that the evidence waiting inside the courthouse had already grown far stronger than anything he imagined. The administrative interview took place the following Tuesday inside a quiet conference room at police headquarters, where every chair, every folder, and every recorder reflected procedure rather than emotion. Officer Nathan Caldwell arrived several minutes early carrying the notebook and reports requested in the official email. Across the table, two investigators from Professional Standards introduced themselves, explained the purpose of the meeting, and reminded Nathan that the review was administrative rather than criminal. They emphasized that the department's responsibility was to determine whether established policy had been followed and whether any corrective action might be necessary after all available evidence had been examined. Nathan answered each question respectfully, describing the events exactly as he remembered them. He explained that he believed the temporary parking restriction covered the location where Danielle Brooks had parked and admitted that he relied on the nearby signs without independently confirming the meter numbers against the city authorization map. One investigator quietly asked why he had declined Danielle's request to verify the parking designation before authorizing the tow. Nathan paused longer than he had during any previous question. He finally admitted that he believed additional verification was unnecessary because he was confident his initial assessment was correct. The room fell silent for several seconds while one investigator made careful notes without offering any reaction. Hundreds of feet away in another government building, Danielle met with her legal team to prepare the initial discovery requests that would soon be exchanged through the normal civil litigation process. She insisted once again that every request remain narrowly focused on documents directly connected to the incident. Parking permits, installation records, body camera footage, dispatch communications, departmental policies, training materials, and maintenance logs were all relevant because each could either confirm or challenge the timeline already established. Danielle understood that strong legal cases were built by allowing the evidence to answer difficult questions instead of attempting to answer them in advance. As the morning continued, The city's outside counsel began conducting its own internal review before preparing an official response to the lawsuit. Attorneys interviewed employees from Public Works, parking enforcement, and the impound facility. Their independent review repeatedly returned to the same issue. Multiple opportunities had existed to verify the exact parking location before the tow proceeded, yet none of those opportunities had been fully used. That conclusion was still preliminary, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Shortly after lunch, Sergeant Rebecca Owens received another update from Professional Standards requesting copies of departmental training materials covering temporary parking enforcement during construction projects. She personally retrieved the manuals used during officer instruction and noticed a highlighted sentence she had taught younger officers many times over the years. Whenever temporary restrictions were involved, officers were expected to verify the specific location using the official authorization documents whenever practical before initiating enforcement. Rebecca quietly closed the binder, recognizing that the written policy was remarkably clear. Later that afternoon, the first exchange of discovery materials officially began. Digital evidence was preserved, photographs were authenticated, and certified copies of municipal records were delivered through secure legal channels. The process moved with deliberate precision, leaving little room for speculation. Nathan finished his interview believing he had answered honestly, but as he walked toward the parking lot, he noticed investigators carrying several additional file boxes into the conference room after he had left. He could not see the labels on the folders, yet their arrival made one fact impossible to ignore. The review had expanded well beyond his own report, and somewhere inside those unopened records might already be the evidence that would determine not only the outcome of the lawsuit, but the future of his career. Several weeks after the lawsuit was officially filed, the first substantive court hearing focused not on dramatic testimony, but on procedure, evidence preservation, and the scope of discovery. The courtroom reflected the quiet discipline of the legal system rather than the tension often portrayed in television dramas. Attorneys organized binders, court staff verified exhibits, and the judge reviewed the docket with measured efficiency before inviting counsel to address the issues scheduled for the day. Danielle Brooks sat beside her attorney with the same composed expression she had maintained since the morning her vehicle had been towed. She had never attempted to influence public opinion, never granted interviews, and never discussed the case outside the appropriate legal process. Everything she intended to say would be supported by documents already exchanged between the parties. Across the courtroom, representatives for the city acknowledged that all requested records had been preserved and disclosed according to the court's scheduling order. Officer Nathan Caldwell attended as required but remained silent while legal counsel spoke on behalf of the department. Watching the proceedings unfold, he realized how different a courtroom felt from a roadside decision. Confidence carried little weight there unless it could be supported by objective evidence. As the hearing progressed, Danielle's attorney introduced a carefully organized timeline that aligned the parking restriction permit, the Public Works installation photographs, dispatch records, body camera footage, and the certified measurements already authenticated during discovery. Each exhibit reinforced the others without contradiction. The judge listened attentively, occasionally asking brief questions to clarify dates and document origins. Midway through the hearing, the city's attorney acknowledged that the temporary parking restriction map and the certified measurements identified a boundary that did not include Danielle's parking space at the time enforcement occurred. The admission was carefully worded and limited to the documentary evidence, but it immediately shifted the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Nathan lowered his eyes toward the counsel table as he understood that one of the central factual disputes had effectively disappeared. Yet the judge made no ruling at that moment. Instead, she reminded both parties that factual agreement on one issue did not automatically resolve every legal question before the court. That measured response became its own quiet cliffhanger because everyone understood additional findings still lay ahead. The hearing continued with discussion of departmental policies governing temporary parking enforcement. Copies of the official training manual were submitted, including the section instructing officers to verify authorized restriction locations whenever practical before ordering a tow. Sergeant Rebecca Owens watched from the gallery, recognizing the same language she had reviewed only days earlier. No one accused Nathan of acting with malicious intent during the hearing. Instead, The discussion centered on whether established procedures had been followed and whether reasonable opportunities for verification had been overlooked. That distinction mattered because the court's responsibility was to evaluate evidence rather than assumptions. After both sides completed their presentations, the judge thanked counsel for the professionalism shown throughout discovery and announced that additional briefing would be required before issuing further decisions. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered near the courthouse steps hoping for dramatic statements, but Danielle politely declined every request for comment. She simply said that she respected the judicial process and believed the evidence should speak before anyone else did. Nathan exited through another hallway with department representatives, saying nothing as cameras remained focused elsewhere. Later that afternoon, the court released a written scheduling order establishing the next phase of litigation and setting deadlines for additional motions. Buried within that otherwise routine document was one sentence directing the parties to prepare for consideration of summary judgment on several key issues, and as attorneys on both sides quietly read those words, they realized the court might soon decide the most important questions without ever needing a full trial. Over the following month, both sides submitted extensive legal briefs addressing the issues identified by the court, and every argument returned to the same foundation: documented facts. Danielle Brooks spent long evenings reviewing filings with her attorney, making certain that every statement cited an exhibit already authenticated during discovery. She remained disciplined, refusing to allow emotion to replace precision even after friends quietly suggested that public opinion had already turned in her favor. She thanked them for their support, but reminded them that court decisions belonged inside the courtroom, not on social media or television. Across the city, Officer Nathan Caldwell continued reporting for duty while the administrative review remained open. He carried out his assignments professionally, yet every shift felt different because he now understood how a single decision could follow an officer long after the patrol car returned to the station. He reread departmental policies several more times, recognizing details he had once treated as routine but now viewed as essential safeguards. During one meeting with professional standards, investigators informed him that the internal review would remain separate from the civil lawsuit, although the factual findings in one process could influence the other. Nathan nodded quietly, realizing that both systems were moving forward on their own timelines. Several days later, attorneys gathered once again before Judge Eleanor Whitmore for oral arguments concerning the pending motions. The courtroom remained calm as each side explained how the undisputed evidence should be interpreted under existing law. Danielle's attorney emphasized that the certified parking maps, body camera footage, dispatch records, and municipal documents consistently established the same sequence of events. The city's attorney acknowledged the factual record but argued that additional legal questions still required careful judicial analysis. Judge Whitmore listened without interruption, occasionally asking focused questions that revealed how closely she had studied every exhibit. Midway through the hearing, she referred directly to the department's written training policy requiring verification of temporary parking restrictions whenever practical before enforcement action. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter because everyone recognized the importance of that document. Yet instead of announcing an immediate decision, the judge thanked counsel for their thorough presentations and stated that she would issue a written ruling after completing her review of the entire record. That brief statement created another wave of anticipation because no one could predict exactly how broadly the forthcoming decision would reach. Outside the courthouse, Danielle returned directly to work rather than celebrating what many observers believe had been a strong hearing. She met with prosecutors preparing for unrelated criminal trials and continued serving the public, exactly as she had before the lawsuit began. Her colleagues admired the consistency of her approach. She never treated the civil case as a personal victory. She treated it as another responsibility requiring patience, professionalism, and respect for the legal process. Meanwhile, Sergeant Rebecca Owens received notice that the department's administrative findings had been completed and forwarded to the Chief of Police for final review. She was instructed not to discuss the recommendations until an official decision had been issued. Even Nathan was not told what conclusions had been reached. The waiting became its own lesson, reminding everyone involved that accountability often moved more slowly than public expectation. Nearly 2 weeks later, Attorneys for both parties received an electronic notification from the clerk of court shortly after sunrise. Judge Whitmore had completed her written ruling, and copies were now available through the court's filing system. Danielle's attorney opened the document immediately while, across town, city attorneys gathered around a conference table to read the same pages. At police headquarters, another message arrived almost simultaneously, instructing Officer Nathan Caldwell to report to the chief's office that afternoon after the court's decision had been fully reviewed, leaving only a few quiet hours before two separate judgments would finally converge. The written opinion from Judge Eleanor Whitmore arrived exactly as promised, and its language reflected the same discipline that had guided the case from the very beginning. The decision relied not on emotion, assumptions, or public attention, but on certified records, authenticated photographs, body camera footage, municipal permits, departmental policies, and testimony gathered through established legal procedures. The court concluded that the documented evidence consistently demonstrated that Danielle Brooks's vehicle had been parked outside the temporary restriction area when it was towed, and that reasonable opportunities to verify the correct parking designation had existed before enforcement action was taken. The opinion further recognized that the resulting civil claim was supported by the objective record developed during discovery. Soon afterward, attorneys representing both parties entered settlement discussions, ultimately reaching an agreement that resolved the civil lawsuit without the need for a lengthy trial, while requiring the city to compensate Danielle for her documented losses and legal expenses. The resolution also included commitments to review municipal towing procedures and improve coordination between public works, parking enforcement, and patrol officers during temporary parking restrictions. Danielle accepted the agreement without celebration because, in her view, the purpose of the lawsuit had never been personal revenge. It had always been about ensuring that the law was applied with the same fairness expected from every public servant. At police headquarters that same afternoon, Officer Nathan Caldwell reported to the chief's office as instructed. Present were the chief, Sergeant Rebecca Owens, and representatives from Professional Standards. The chief explained that the department had completed its independent administrative review after considering all available evidence, including the court's factual findings, departmental policy, and Nathan's own interview. The review concluded that established verification procedures had not been followed before authorizing the tow, and that the oversight had contributed directly to the incident. The review also found a documented disparity in how Nathan exercised discretion. In comparable encounters, he had repeatedly offered white drivers additional time to produce documents or clarify parking restrictions, while Danielle had been denied the same opportunity despite remaining fully cooperative. Evidence obtained and authenticated through Danielle's lawsuit exposed the full procedural record, including Nathan's body camera footage, the certified parking boundaries, and comparable enforcement incidents. Those findings prompted the department to complete its disciplinary review. Because Nathan had previously received corrective instruction for comparable conduct, the department concluded that another warning would not adequately address the repeated violation. As a result, Nathan's employment with the department was terminated in accordance with applicable policy and departmental regulations. The decision was delivered respectfully, without anger or humiliation, because accountability did not require disrespect. Nathan listened quietly, thanked the chief for allowing him to speak during the investigation, turned in his badge and department-issued equipment, and left the building with a deeper understanding of how confidence without verification could carry consequences far beyond a single decision. In the months that followed, the department introduced updated training emphasizing careful verification of temporary parking restrictions, stronger documentation requirements, and additional supervisory guidance before certain enforcement actions involving temporary municipal changes. Sergeant Rebecca Owens helped instruct new officers, reminding them that patience often protected both the public and the officer making the decision. Marcus Ellis continued supervising the municipal impound facility, where documentation procedures became even more detailed to reduce future disputes. Assistant District Attorney Kevin Ramirez returned to prosecuting criminal cases, carrying with him another reminder that the strength of any legal argument rested on credible evidence rather than dramatic claims. Danielle Brooks resumed her daily responsibilities exactly as she had before the lawsuit began. She walked the same courthouse hallways, prepared the same case files, and greeted the same employees with quiet professionalism. One afternoon, while leaving the courthouse after another routine hearing, she paused beside the public parking lot where everything had started months earlier. The spaces looked ordinary again, and traffic flowed peacefully through the intersection. She stood there only for a moment before continuing toward her vehicle, knowing that justice was rarely defined by dramatic victories. It was built one careful decision at a time by people willing to respect the truth even when doing so required admitting a mistake. The badge had represented authority, the courtroom had represented accountability, but neither proved stronger than the simple facts preserved by honest records. In the end, careers could be rebuilt, policies could be improved, and public trust could slowly return, yet one lesson remained impossible to ignore. Real justice does not belong to the loudest voice, the highest office, or the brightest badge. It belongs to the evidence, because the truth does not need revenge to prevail.